Welcome to another CodeSwag JavaScript tutorial. In this episode, we're learning about promises, specifically how to control the order of execution given a number of code blocks that we want to run following the resolution of a promise. Let's dive into it. So suppose we have the following code. We are creating a promise that we then resolve, and after resolving that promise, we call three then methods chained one after the other. And in turn, they are logging to the console the strings first, second, and third. And at the end, we are catching any errors and logging the errors to the console. So a very simple block of code, and we expect that each then handler is going to be called one after the other in that particular order, first, second, and third. So let's head to our browser and test out the code. So here I am in my web browser. I am using Firefox. You can use Firefox or Chrome, any of those will do. You also need to open your JavaScript console, and you can do that by pressing Ctrl-Shift-I on Windows or Command-Shift-I on a Mac. So I'm going to paste in the code that you saw on the previous screen, and I'm going to press Enter to run the code. And as expected, when the code runs, we are getting logged to the console the strings first, second, and third. So each then handler attached to a promise is called one after the other, with the value returned from one then handler being passed on to the next then handler. So from this one to this one to that one. That's why we get the output that we see here, which is as expected. However, if we execute the code that you're looking at right now, we would expect the same sequence of execution from the then handlers, but that's not quite what we get. Let's try this out in the browser. So I'm back in the browser, and I'm going to paste in the second bit of code. And upon pressing enter, we get first being immediately printed, and after a second we get third, and then we get second. So what's going on here, and how do we make the code execute in the intended order? So as you can see, the second then handler has a set timeout function call with 2000 milliseconds, aka 2 seconds, as the timeout. So it won't be executed immediately upon being called, but rather 2 seconds later. The third then handler has a 1000 millisecond timeout, or 1 second, which means that though it is indeed called immediately after the second then handler, it will be executed first because its timeout runs out before the second timeout. And of course, the code runs so fast that the time between the second then handler call and the third then handler call is imperceivable for humans. So the time that it takes between calling the second then handler and third then handler is almost zero. While the time between the set timeouts is 1000 milliseconds, which is a huge difference in terms of the time it takes to execute code. So therefore, we're seeing first printed immediately after calling the promise, and after 1 second, third will be printed to the screen, and then finally after 2 seconds, we'll then have second printed to the screen. So the key takeaway from this is that if any then handler is, for example, making an API call or doing some other long-running operation, then the next then handler might be executed immediately, even if the long-running operation in the previous then handler is not yet completed. When you attach multiple then handlers, it's not guaranteed that the next then handler will be called only after the previous then handler finishes its work, if there is some additional asynchronous code inside that then handler. So, how do we fix this? What we can do is we can return a new promise from the second then handler and only call resolve or reject once we are done with our API call or whatever other long-running operation we are trying to do. This will guarantee that the next then handler will always be executed after the previous one has finished. This is because when we call a promise, the promise will wait until we explicitly call resolve or reject inside the promise. Let's try running this code in the console and see what happens. We are back in our console and I'm going to paste in the code that we saw from before. So you can see that here in the second then handler, we are returning a new promise. And only after we have run the code inside our set timeout do we then explicitly call resolve. And only after this resolve has been called do we then move on to the the third then handler. So let's run the code to test if my theory is correct. So we get first, second, and then third is printed. So we have first immediately being printed, then after 2 seconds, second is printed, and then after a second, third is printed, which is what we intend given the order that we've placed our then handlers. The code for this tutorial was taken from Yogesh Shavan's blog at blog.yogeshshavan.dev. All credits are to him for the code and for the brilliant explanation. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share the video with a friend. You can also support us to create more great tutorials by becoming a patron at patreon.com/codeswag. Becoming a patron also gives you a number of exclusive benefits, so please check that out. You could also support by buying some awesome swag and merch at our shop on codeswag.net/shop. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.